If you grew up anywhere near church, then you were taught a theology that said the love of God is available for all people. The message many of us were taught as children was clear, it's absolute, it's egalitarian. God does not play favorites. We remember singing songs as children about how every one of us was precious in his sight, right? We are taught from the very beginning that every person who shows up early to help greet and volunteer their time is as cherished as the person who sneaks out before the closing benediction is given. The only problem with this is that the writer of the fourth gospel, John, did not get that memo. When you look at the Gospel of John, we run headfirst into this master storyteller who seems completely unbothered by our modern views of equity. On no less than 5 occasions, the author describes himself not by his name, but by a title that honestly feels very self-serving. He calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. I mean, let's be honest. If somebody in your workplace did that, you would call him passive-aggressive, right? It's the spiritual equivalent for those of you who are going to show up at your family summer reunions with a t-shirt that says, Mom's favorite child. When we read this text closely, it does appear a little bit that Jesus kind of had a favorite. But the problem is we hear favorite and we jump all the way over to exclusive. We think about the playground where being picked first means someone will be picked last. We think of rejection because the reality is every single one of us, every one of us has just a little part of us that still is broken and knows what it means to be excluded. And we have framed a God where we think exclusivity doesn't really jive with a God who is absolutely loving and unconditionally graceful with all people. So we need to ask ourselves, have we misread the stories of John? What if Jesus' favoritism isn't about excluding? What if it is about showing us how to follow? So to understand John, we actually need to understand who John was before he met Jesus. In his youth, he's not known as the apostle of love. He and his brother James had a completely different nickname. They were the sons of thunder. It was not a good nickname to have. They got that title most likely because they were rash, they were volatile, they had a reactionary anger. There's a story out of the Gospel of Luke when they go to a Samaritan village and Jesus is not just not welcomed, he is rejected. And John's first instinct is to say, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to burn them up? It's not really what we want a disciple of Jesus saying. And yet maybe we've become too comfortable with disciples of Jesus saying just that. We need to recognize that each of us carries an unmended flesh, something broken in us. That condition where greed trumps generosity, where selfishness dictates relationships, and where anger falls far too easily into hatred. John knew this journey because he knew what it meant to move from the son of thunder to become the disciple whom Jesus loved. But how did he get there? While the other disciples are off talking and arguing and being loud about who is going to sit on the right hand and making promises that they were never going to keep, John is doing something entirely different. He's sitting at Jesus' feet. He's listening. He's pondering. He is absorbing. He's absorbing the reality of who Jesus is. John has caught on to what Jesus is asking him to do, which is not to be focused on serving out of duty, but ministering out of proximity with one another. John was so close to Jesus that he absorbed the love of God until it melted his anger, it mended his soul, it healed his rashness. So when John sits down to start writing his story to the community, he doesn't start with the genealogy of Matthew. He doesn't start with a birth narrative like Luke. He doesn't go like Mark does to the facts and nothing but the facts. He starts at the very beginning of creation. Because John is trying to get us to see that this, what we are about, is part of a cosmic healing that has been happening since the Big Bang. And he is inviting us to see ourselves through the lens of Jesus as part of that healing. Now, here's one of the great ironies of the gospel function. John is this master storyteller, right? And he's captivating and we are drawn into it. But we are not meant to read this in a study alone. John wrote this so that it would be shared orally with a tradition. A community would gather and they would read large swaths of this story. Ancient people were oral learners, and they were certainly better listeners than any of us are today. Most people probably couldn't read at this time, and so they receive the poetry and the stories through their ears. Now, I, as a preacher, must sit with some personal vulnerability here, because I would have drastically failed in the ancient oral world because I do not listen well at all. Now, a piece of that's because I have hearing loss, but I don't process our world through sounds. I receive information through visual engagement, and I need to see things to truly comprehend them. And the irony, and it's not lost on me, is that my vocation, my calling of life is to stand up every week and speak into an oral space. I get it when I don't receive information the way I share it. And that is exactly why I love the next part of what John does, which is to write this. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen God's glory. What John is telling us is God didn't just stay as a voice in the darkness. God became a body. God became flesh. God came here so that something could be healed, something could be beholden, something could be touched, so that the world would change. When John's writing this story, he's not writing to an established church. He's not writing to a group of people who are affluent. These are folks who've been kicked out of the temple and told they don't belong because they're Jewish Christians. Their spiritual home has been ripped away from them. And so John is writing this gospel to say to them, you don't need the brick and mortar because the temple has flesh. The temple walks amongst you. I think we share a struggle with those early followers where we're coming to church on Sunday expecting something miraculous to happen. We want to be entertained. We want to be emotionally moved. We want to have that instant aha moment, that epiphany that will fix our week before our week has even started. And I think we are invited into something far different. Because the work of the church is remarkably simple. John's purpose to us is to heal ourselves, that we may then heal the world, that we may then heal creation. We are called to be a different people in the world. We're called to look at a world where greed and selfishness are valued over compassion, and not complain about the way the world is and how awful, but to step into that moment and help mend it. To absorb Christ so much like John did that we become the agents of mending what is brokenness, mending what is hurt in our pews, in our communities, in our courtyard, in our city, in our country, in all of creation. There's a beautiful story told about Rabbi Israel Salanter. Late one night, the rabbi was walking the darkened streets of his 19th century town, and he noticed that one of the shops had a faint flickering light. And as he got closer, he saw that it was the cobbler. And he peeked through the window. He saw the old shoemaker hunched over his bench, working really hard by the dying dim light of one single candle. Rabbi Salanter pushed the door open. He stepped inside. He said, "Why are you working so late? It's not too late to repair shoes. It's far too late to repair shoes." The cobbler didn't even look up from the leather he was sewing. He just smiled, and he said, "As long as the candle is burning, there is still time to make amends." Rabbi Salanter then went out into his little town, and he walked up every street. He took those words into his heart. As long as the candle of life still burns inside you, there's time to repair a soul. There's time to mend some of our flaws. There's time to seek forgiveness and give forgiveness. Jesus, inviting the sons of thunder into the group of disciples, was a moment to invite them to be transformed, to see a candle that was still burning in them, maybe dimly, but to see a soul that could be mended so it could go out and mend others too. The Word became flesh and made its home among